Dear students of class 10A and 10B, the last lesson from Civics, Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers, I am going to start teaching of this lesson. As soon as the teaching of this lesson will be completed, your syllabus for the council exam also will be completed. This is the last lesson, and this lesson is very important this year, my dear students. Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. Now, some points, as I mentioned in the board, please look at it, and as per these points, I shall explain the topic. First point, appointment. Appointment of the Prime Minister. Next one, appointment of the other ministers. Ministers of different categories. There are some ministers of different categories. Some ministers are there of different categories as mentioned in the board: Council of Ministers, Cabinet Ministers, Ministers of State, Deputy Ministers. These all are the ministers, and some restrictions also are imposed by the Constitution of India regarding the process of appointment of different ministers by the President and under the advice of the Prime Minister. Now, first one, appointment. You know, the Prime Minister is appointed by the President of India. The Prime Minister is appointed by the President of India. The President appoints the Prime Minister. But how is the Prime Minister appointed? There are certain, process by which the President appoints the Prime Minister. Initially, one political party they select which would be their party leader and which one would be the Prime Minister. Suppose one political party gain majority in the country. In that case, the leader of the political party would be called directly by the President to take an oath as the Prime Minister of India. But suppose many political parties failed to gain two-third majority. No one got two-third majority. In that case, the President will talk to different political leaders, different political parties regarding forming of a government in the center, and then a political party who is able to take support from other political parties, and there is a possibility of forming government by the same political party. The Prime Minister, after having talked to them, will call them to form the government. In that case, the political party who gain support and seats more than other political parties, there is a possibility of forming a government from their side, because they initially talk to other political leaders and make it sure that they would get support from the political parties and would be able to form a government in the center. And whenever they are able, one political party is able to get support from other smaller parties, then they talk to the President and request the President to allow them to form a government. The President initially asks the political party whether they have selected the leader of their party, who is going to be appointed as the Prime Minister of India. Whenever the President comes to know from them that one leader has been chosen by them from their party and his name also is proposed to be the Prime Minister of India, in that case, the President allows him to take an oath as the Prime Minister of India, and also by this way the party forms a government in the center. But thing is that sometimes some political parties, in the Lok Sabha, means and the President then appoints the Prime Minister, but sometimes what happened, sometimes what happened, the president has to appoint that person who can prove that he has the support of some smaller parties or smaller group of parties. In that case, the president allows the party to be a majority party in the house, and then on behalf of that majority party, the president calls the leader of that party and suggests him to be the prime minister and calls to take an oath as the prime minister of India, according to which the person becomes the prime minister. Now, ministers of different categories. There are different ministers. There are different category ministers. There are ministers of different categories in the center. For example, Council of Ministers, ministers of cabinet ministers, ministers of state, and deputy ministers. There are four category ministers. There are ministers of four categories, like Council of Ministers, cabinet ministers, ministers of state, and deputy ministers. Now, who are known as Council of Ministers, and how are Council of Ministers appointed? How are the Council of Ministers appointed? Now I am going to discuss. Under Article number 75 of the Constitution of India, it is said that the Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President of India, and other ministers shall be also appointed by the President, but on the advice of the Prime Minister. That means the President cannot appoint any minister directly. In that case, the President has to depend on the advice of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister advises the President to appoint other ministers. But initially, the President appoints the Prime Minister, according to which the Prime Minister advises the President to appoint other ministers, and then other ministers are appointed by the President on the advice of him. By convention, the President has to accept choice of the Prime Minister in the matter of appointment and dismissal of ministers also. That means at the time when the ministers are supposed to be dismissed from their posts because of their inabilities to shoulder responsibilities as a minister, in that case the President has to depend on the advice of the Prime Minister. That means initially Prime Minister advises the President to dismiss these much ministers from their posts. Then the President dismisses them from their posts. Normally, only the members of the Parliament are appointed as ministers. But in some cases, in case of non-member, suppose one non-member of a parliament is appointed as a minister. In that case, the person has to prove to be a member of the parliament within 6 months, and in case of failure, the minister has to resign from his post. For example, once again I repeat, suppose one non-permanent member, but that means a person who is not the member of parliament but is appointed as the minister on the advice of the Prime Minister by the President. In that case, the person has to prove to be a member of the parliament within 6 months. In case of his failure, the minister has to resign from his post. But it does not happen, because a person can become a member of the Rajya Sabha, either Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha. So suppose the people must not vote for that person, but the person is choiceable one by the Prime Minister. Prime Minister wants to make him a minister in his ministry. In that case, as a ruling party, the Prime Minister can make the person to be the member of the Rajya Sabha, because the election for a member of Rajya Sabha is not so tough as the election for the member of Lok Sabha. That's why the person automatically will become the member of Rajya Sabha by the efforts of the ruling party and their members, and then he will become, and then he will continue his works as a minister of Prime Minister's ministry. Now, next point, the Constitution did not refer to the word cabinet before 1979, but after 1979, the word cabinet is used by the Constitution of India and referred only to the Council of Ministers. Under 44th Amendment Act of the Constitution of India, the President shall not issue a proclamation of national emergency without being consented by the Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. The Prime Minister initially gives his consent in consultation with Council of Ministers or Cabinet. Then, finally, after having taken the written advice of the Prime Minister or the Cabinet, the President declares national emergency throughout the country. The Prime Minister and other ministers consult with each other regarding the declaration of national emergency by the President, and then on being consented by the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers or Cabinet, the President declares national emergency under 44th Amendment Act of the Constitution of India. Next one, how many ministers are there in the ministry? There are there are ministers of different of four categories, like Council of Ministers. Now we are going to discuss about Council of Ministers. There are most important members of Council of Ministers. They are important portfolios like Home, like Cabinet, like External Affairs, Railways, Finance, Defence, and these are the important departments, important ministries. The Council of Ministers, the ministers are appointed as the Council of Ministers for these departments. Only Cabinet ministers have the right to attend meetings of the Cabinet. They together determine the policy and program of the government. Who? Only the Cabinet ministers. The Cabinet ministers are the ministers who can hold important portfolios, not Council of Ministers, but only the Cabinet ministers. The Cabinet ministers can hold only the important portfolios, like Home, Defence, Finance, External Affairs. These are the Railways. These are the important portfolios only the Cabinet ministers can hold. And some ministry also is there sometimes of more than one ministry. Why? Because only Cabinet ministers have a right to hold or to attend meetings of the Cabinet, but not other ministers. They together determine the policy and program of the government. And ministers of states. Now, ministers of state. The Cabinet ministers, are the part of the Council of Ministers. So it is they unitedly decide whether any decision which is going to be taken by the Prime Minister regarding the fulfillment of regarding the demands of the people of the country before the election, they assured before them. And this is the matter, and the secrecy of the ministry. Only the Cabinet and Council of Ministers together attend the meeting and takes decision regarding the policy and program of the government under the advice of the Prime Minister of India. Now, ministers of state. The ministers of state are the second category ministers. The ministers of state are the second category ministers. They may or may not hold an independent charge of any portfolio. Prime Minister may or may not consult them That means the ministers of states are not responsible ministers like cabinet, and they may not hold any important portfolios like the cabinet, and the prime minister may consult the prime minister consult the cabinet ministers before taking any decision, but the prime minister never consults the ministers of state, because the ministers of state has no right. The ministers of state have no right to attend any meeting, but sometimes they are invited to attend the meeting regarding the crisis of their own departments. In order to solve any crisis of their own department, sometimes some ministers of states are invited to attend the meeting of the cabinet. Sometimes they are invited to attend the meeting. And now deputy ministers. Cabinet ministers, ministers of state, now deputy ministers. Who are deputy ministers? The deputy ministers are the third category of ministers who assist the cabinet ministers of the and the council of ministers. That means the deputy ministers are not independent ministers. They are dependent ministers. They are appointed in order to assist the works of the cabinet ministers and the council of ministers, and they have no right to attend any meeting. They are junior ministers and are placed under the senior ministers whom they have, whom they have to assist. They take no part in cabinet deliberations. The council of ministers comprise the prime ministers and the council and the number of other ministers appointed by the president on the advice of whom? On the advice of the prime minister. The Constitution of India, last point, restriction imposed by the Constitution of India. The Constitution of India, now the Constitution of India, earlier it was not, this restriction was not imposed, but in order to reduce huge expenditure, in order to curb expenditure of ministers, the Constitution of India has imposed certain restrictions on the system of appointment of ministers. In order to shorten the ministry appointed by the prime minister, appointed by the president under the advice of the prime minister, some additional alteration is brought in order to shorten the ministry, in order to curb expenditure for maintaining a large or jumbo ministry. That's why, my dear students, in order to curb huge expenditure, in order to avoid jumbo size ministries, the Constitution of India has imposed certain restrictions, according to which it is decided that the Council of Ministers at the center and in the states to 15% of the strength of the Lok Sabha and state legislatures, and in case of smaller states, the maximum number of ministers allowed is 12. And this step was taken only to check defections from one party to another. It is done in order to curb huge expenditure for maintaining a jumbo-sized ministries. That's why this restriction is imposed by the Constitution of India. Up to this, my dear students. Next day, the remaining part. Thank you.